At exactly 5:15 a.m., I was ripped from sleep by frantic pounding on my front door. When I flung it open, my daughter-in-law stood there, her face drained of color, eyes wide with pure terror. "Richard, Dad, please don't go to work today. Just trust me." I had no idea what was wrong. She refused to explain, only begged me to stay home. I decided to trust her and called in sick. By noon, when the police called with devastating news, I realized she had just saved my life. That terrifying morning changed everything. Before I tell you what the police told me at noon, please subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching this story from, and whether you've ever had a family member save your life. The bitter Chicago cold cut through my dreams like a knife. But it wasn't the February chill that jolted me awake. It was the sound of desperate fists pounding against my front door at exactly 5:17 in the morning. Nobody knocks like that, unless the world is ending. I stumbled toward the door, my 68-year-old joints protesting with every step. Outside, pre-dawn darkness wrapped around my Lincoln Park neighborhood, broken only by streetlights casting shadows across snow-dusted lawns. The pounding continued, more frantic now. When I pulled open the heavy maple door, the last person I expected to see was my daughter-in-law, Margaret. She stood on my doorstep in pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat, her face pale as winter moonlight. Her usually perfect auburn hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her hazel eyes were rimmed red with unshed tears. "Margaret," I whispered, suddenly wide awake. "What in God's name are you doing here?" She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping closer. "Richard, Dad, please don't leave the house today. Please, just trust me." The desperation in her voice sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air rushing through my doorway. In the 4 years since she'd married my eldest son, Alexander, I'd never seen Margaret like this. She was always composed, the picture of grace and professionalism. This trembling woman before me was someone entirely different. "Margaret, you're frightening me," I said, reaching out to steady her. "What's wrong? Is Alexander all right?" She shook her head quickly. "Alexander is fine. He's still sleeping. He doesn't know I'm here." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I heard him on the phone last night. He's planning something for when you go to work today. My eldest son." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Alexander had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so. But hearing his own wife speak about him with such fear made my blood run cold. Planning what exactly, I asked. "I don't know the details," she said, words tumbling out in a rush. "But please, Dad, just stay home today. Don't go anywhere. Don't leave this house." I studied her face in the porch light, searching for any sign this might be some misunderstanding. Margaret had always been caught in the middle between Alexander's ambitions and family harmony. She'd never been one for drama, and she certainly wouldn't risk her marriage over nothing. "You're asking me to trust you without explaining why," I said carefully. She reached out and grabbed my hands with both of hers. Her fingers were ice cold and shaking. "Something terrible will happen if you leave this house today. I can feel it. Richard, please." For 40 years, I'd built Harrison Builders from nothing into a $60 million empire. I'd made countless decisions based on gut instincts and advice from people I trusted. Standing there in my doorway at 5 in the morning, looking into the frightened eyes of a woman who was risking everything to warn me, I made another one. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll stay home." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." After she left, I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, staring at Susan Miller's number. My secretary had been with me for 22 years, and I'd never once called in without a legitimate reason. "Susan," I said when she answered on the third ring, "I won't be coming in today. I'm feeling under the weather." As I hung up the phone, one question echoed in my mind like a warning bell. What exactly was my own son planning to do to me? 3 hours had passed since Margaret's warning, but I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. I sat in my breakfast nook with coffee and the Chicago Tribune, though the words blurred together. Every few minutes I glanced toward the window, half expecting something that would explain my daughter-in-law's desperate plea. The doorbell's chime cut through the morning silence. I set down my cup and walked to the front door, heart hammering. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a tall figure in a dark coat. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with my eldest son, Alexander. The surprise in my voice was genuine. "What are you doing here?" My 37-year-old son stood on my doorstep in his perfectly tailored navy suit. Dark hair slicked back in that corporate style he'd adopted years ago. But something was off about his usual confident demeanor. His jaw was tight, and his brown eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't identify. "Dad," his voice carried genuine confusion. "Why aren't you at the office? This isn't like you at all." I studied his face, searching for any hint of the menace Margaret had warned me about. "I'm feeling under the weather today. Thought I'd take it easy." Alexander stepped closer, brow furrowing with apparent worry. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call doctor?" "Ellis, just tired. That's all. Nothing a day of rest won't cure." But I noticed how his eyes darted past me into the house as if looking for something. His hands, usually steady, fidgeted with his car keys. "Are you certain you can't come in for just an hour?" he pressed. "The Thompson project needs your signature, and the city inspector is coming this afternoon." There it was, that insistent tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something badly, the same tone that had always made me give in. "Alexander, the Thompson project can wait one day. You're perfectly capable of handling the inspector." His smile faltered briefly. "Of course. Dad, you're right." He glanced at his expensive watch. "Well, I guess I'll handle everything at the office then." Something cold twisted in my stomach. Margaret's words echoed. "He's planning something for when you go to work today." "I'm sure you will," I replied, watching his face carefully. Alexander nodded briskly and turned to leave. "Feel better, Dad. I'll check on you later." I watched from my doorway as he walked to his silver Audi. Instead of driving away, he sat in the driver's seat and pulled out his phone. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders as he spoke to whoever was on the other end. His voice was too low to catch the words, but his body language spoke volumes. This wasn't a casual business call. His free hand gestured sharply, and twice he glanced back toward my house with an expression I'd never seen before. Frustration mixed with calculation. After several minutes, he ended the call and drove away without looking back. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Margaret had been right to warn me. Whatever my son was planning, my absence from the office had clearly disrupted it. The question that terrified me most wasn't what Alexander was planning anymore. It was why my own flesh and blood would want to hurt me at all. By 10:30 that morning, I'd given up pretending to watch the news. The television droned on, but my mind kept circling back to Alexander's strange visit and that tense phone call. I sat in my leather recliner when the shrill ring of my landline cut through my troubled thoughts. Caller ID, Harrison Builders, Susan. "Hello." "Susan," I answered, expecting some routine question. "Mr. Harrison." Her voice was pitched high with panic. "Thank God you answered. There's been a terrible accident at the downtown construction site." The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor. "What? What kind of accident?" "The crane collapsed. 4 workers are hurt bad. Mr. Harrison. Broken bones may be worse." The ambulances just left for Northwestern Memorial. My world tilted sideways. In 40 years, we'd never had a serious accident. Our safety record was impeccable. How did this happen, I don't know. But you need to get down here right away. Fire department, paramedics, reporters. Everyone's asking questions. I was already reaching for my keys. I'll be there in 25 minutes. The drive passed in a blur of racing thoughts. Margaret's warning echoed in my mind, but I couldn't see how this connected to Alexander's plans. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Fire trucks blocked half the street. Red lights flashing. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the February wind, cordoning off where our tower crane lay twisted like a broken toy. I pushed through the crowd, heart sinking as I took in the destruction. The crane had fallen onto the partially completed building, crushing the framework where our crew had been working. Mr. Harrison. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face. Channel 5 News. Can you comment on the safety violations that led to this accident? Safety violations. I stopped cold. What are you talking about? Sources say Harrison Builders has been cutting corners on safety equipment to boost profits. What's your response? My mouth went dry. That's absolutely false. We have the highest safety standards in the industry. But I could hear angry voices from workers gathered nearby. Phrases like cheap equipment and knew this would happen drifted over the noise. I spotted our site foreman Mark Jenkins talking to a police officer. When he saw me, his expression hardened. Mark, what happened here? He looked at me with disgust I'd never seen before. You tell me, Mr. Harrison. You're the one who signed off on the budget cuts. What budget cuts? Mark, I have no idea what you're talking about. Before he could answer, a tall man in a dark coat approached. His badge read, Detective Larson, Chicago Police, Mr. Harrison. We've received serious allegations about safety violations at your company. The words hit like physical blows. Detective, I can assure you, Harrison Builders maintains the highest safety standards. That may be, sir. But we've received an anonymous tip claiming you've been deliberately cutting safety costs to increase profits. His blue eyes studied my face intently. We need to examine your company records immediately. The crowd seemed to press closer, faces blurred with accusation and suspicion. In 2 hours, I'd gone from respected businessman to someone suspected of endangering his own employees. This is a serious investigation now. Mr. Harrison, Detective Larson continued, we'll need access to your office and all financial records related to this project. Standing there in the February cold, surrounded by the wreckage and suspicious stares of people I'd worked with for years, Margaret's warning finally made terrible sense. This wasn't an accident. This was exactly what my son had been planning all along. The drive back to my office felt like a funeral procession. Detective Larson followed behind in his unmarked sedan while I gripped the steering wheel. Knuckles white. The familiar downtown Chicago route seemed foreign now, as if I was seeing my own city through a stranger's eyes. When we reached Harrison Builders' 25th floor, my office felt like a trap rather than the sanctuary it had been for 4 decades. After you, Mr. Harrison, Detective Larson said, pulling out a folded warrant. Susan looked up from her desk, face still pale from the morning's chaos. Mr. Harrison, I've been fielding calls from reporters all morning. Nothing for now. Susan, I turned to the detective. What do you need to see financial records, safety reports, correspondence related to the downtown project? He pulled on latex gloves. Let's start with your filing cabinet. I unlocked the metal drawers with trembling hands, watching him methodically rifle through folders I'd organized myself. Everything looked normal until he reached downtown project safety reports. Interesting, he murmured, pulling out a thick document. Can you explain this? He held up a report titled Cost Reduction Initiative, Safety Department, with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. The document outlined cutting safety spending by 45% to maximize quarterly profits. I've never seen that document before in my life, I whispered. Your signature says otherwise. His eyebrows rose skeptically. He continued searching, finding more damning evidence. A printed email with my name read, "Cut safety budget immediately. We need higher profit margins this quarter and safety equipment is an unnecessary expense." Susan, have you ever seen these documents? My secretary leaned over, confusion creasing her face. Mr. Harrison, I handle all your correspondence, and I've never typed anything like this. Detective Larson moved to my personal safe. Open this as well. With shaking hands, I entered the combination. Inside were more forged documents. Purchase orders for substandard safety equipment. Invoices for suppliers I'd never heard of. All bearing my signature. Mr. Harrison, Detective Larson said, his voice taking on a formal tone that sent chills down my spine. This evidence suggests you knowingly endangered your workers to increase profits. The room spun around me. 40 years of building a reputation for integrity, destroyed by documents I'd never seen. Someone planted these, I said desperately. Someone with access to my office, my signature, my safe. That's a serious accusation. Who would have that kind of access? The answer hit me like a physical blow. But I couldn't say my own son's name aloud. Based on this evidence, you're looking at criminal negligence charges, endangering workers, possibly manslaughter if those injured don't make it. His words fell like hammer blows. You could be facing serious prison time if convicted. Standing in my own office, surrounded by forged evidence of crimes I'd never committed. I realized Alexander hadn't just planned to frame me. He'd planned to destroy me completely. Just as Detective Larson reached for his handcuffs, the office door burst open. Margaret stood in the doorway, clutching a thick manila folder against her chest. Detective, before you arrest him, you need to see this evidence. Detective Larson paused. Ma'am, this is a police investigation. I'm going to have to ask you to. I'm Margaret Harrison, Chief Financial Officer of this company, she said, stepping forward with newfound authority. And I have proof that my father-in-law is being framed. Susan gasped. I stared at Margaret in shock. How had she known to come here, Margaret? What are you doing here? She looked at me with eyes full of regret. Dad, I need to tell you the truth. Last night, I overheard Alexander on the phone. I only knew he planned to plant documents in your office today. I had no idea about the construction site accident. Detective Larson frowned. What kind of documents? Margaret opened her folder and spread financial reports across my desk. I'm the CFO here. Detective, I know every transaction in this company, and I can prove Richard had no access to the accounts used to purchase substandard safety equipment. She pointed to a computer printout. These purchases were made last Wednesday at 1:45 p.m. Richard was at Rush Hospital visiting his friend after surgery. I have hospital visitor logs to prove it. Detective Larson leaned over the documents, his expression beginning to shift. Go on. The email you found was sent from an IP address tracing to a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. Richard was nowhere near downtown that day. Margaret pulled out more papers. These purchase orders were processed through a subsidiary account Richard doesn't have access to. Only 3 people have authorization. Myself, Alexander, and our site foreman, Mark Jenkins. She opened her laptop on my desk. Our system logs every transaction with timestamps and IP addresses. The purchases were made using Mark Jenkins's login credentials. The screen showed detailed transaction logs. Mark Jenkins purchased all this substandard equipment using company funds. The invoices were doctored to make it appear Richard authorized them. But the signatures, Detective Larson said. Digital forgeries. Alexander had high-resolution scans of Richard's signature from legitimate contracts. With the right software, anyone can create convincing fakes. Detective Larson studied the evidence, his expression growing troubled. Mrs. Harrison, are you saying your own husband orchestrated this? Margaret's voice broke slightly. I'm saying these financial records don't lie. Someone used Mark Jenkins's credentials to purchase faulty equipment, then created false documentation to frame Richard. She pulled out one final document. And here's the smoking gun. Detective, a wire transfer of $75,000 from Alexander Harrison's personal account to Mark Jenkins's bank account sent 4 days ago. Detective Larson's eyes widened. Payment for services. That's what it looks like. These purchases that led to today's accident were made by someone else using company funds. Margaret closed her laptop and looked directly at him. Detective, you need to investigate Mark Jenkins. He's the one who bought the faulty equipment that caused the crane collapse. The silence was deafening. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. Margaret had handed us the key to proving my innocence. But looking at her tear-stained face, I realized what this meant for her marriage, her family, her entire life. She was sacrificing everything to save me. 20 minutes after Margaret's revelation, Detective Larson was coordinating Mark Jenkins's arrest. I watched from my office window as police cars raced toward the downtown construction site. At the site, Mark was loading tools into his pickup when he spotted approaching police vehicles. His weathered face went pale and he dropped a wrench that clattered against concrete. Mark Jenkins, Chicago Police. We need you for questioning. Mark's eyes darted frantically around the fenced construction site, but there was nowhere to run. More police cars blocked the exits. What's this about? Mark asked, voice cracking. I was just packing up. We'll discuss that at the station, Detective Larson replied. In the Stark interrogation room. Mark sat across from Detective Larson at a metal table. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face. Tell me about the safety equipment purchases for the downtown project, Detective Larson began. Mark straightened, trying to project confidence. All purchases go through Mr. Harrison's approval. I just follow orders. Detective Larson slid a printout across the table. This shows purchases made using your login credentials. Substandard crane cables, defective safety harnesses, cheap scaffolding. All purchased last Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Harrison told me to cut costs. Those were his direct orders. Interesting. These purchases were made at 1:45 p.m. Last Wednesday, Richard Harrison was at Rush Hospital at that exact time, visiting a friend after surgery. We have visitor logs and security footage confirming his location. Mark's facade began cracking. Sweat formed on his forehead. Maybe I got the timing wrong. He could have called me from the hospital while visiting a sick friend. Detective Larson leaned forward. We also have the IP address where these orders originated. Your home computer. Not any company device Richard had access to. Mark's hands trembled. I was working from home. Mr. Harrison called with orders. Show me the call log. Mark fumbled with his phone, scrolling desperately. His breathing became shallow. It must have been deleted somehow. Detective Larson pulled out another document. Mark, we have a wire transfer showing $75,000 deposited into your account 4 days ago from Alexander Harrison's personal account. The color drained from Mark's face completely. That's not what it looks like. What is it then? A bonus, a gift? Detective Larson's voice was relentless. Because it looks like payment for services rendered. Mark's composure shattered. His shoulders shook as tears streamed down his cheeks. I can't take this anymore. Alexander Harrison paid me. He paid me to buy cheap equipment and make it look like his father ordered it. The confession hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mark, tell me everything from the beginning. Through his tears, Mark unraveled the conspiracy. Alexander approached me a month ago, said his father was planning to sell the company and cut jobs. He offered $75,000 to help make his father look incompetent. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. I have text messages, recorded phone calls. Alexander gave me detailed instructions on which equipment to buy and how to forge the paperwork. Detective Larson nodded grimly. We're going to need all that evidence. Mark, every text, every recording, every piece of communication with Alexander Harrison. By 7 that evening, Mark Jenkins's confession had given Detective Larson everything he needed, armed with text messages, recorded phone calls, and a detailed timeline of the conspiracy. Police cars pulled up to Alexander's upscale home in Gold Coast. Through the front window, Detective Larson could see Alexander moving frantically around his living room, stuffing clothes and documents into a large suitcase. 2 plane tickets to the Bahamas lay on his coffee table next to stacks of cash. Alexander Harrison, you're under arrest, Detective Larson announced as officers surrounded the house. Alexander froze like a deer in headlights when he saw the police at his door. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The confident executive facade had completely crumbled. Margaret stood in the doorway behind the officers, her face a mask of pain and disappointment. I was there, too, having insisted on witnessing my son's arrest, despite Detective Larson's advice to stay away. This is a mistake, Alexander said, as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I don't know what Mark told you, but he's lying. At the police station. Alexander sat in the same interrogation room where Mark had broken down hours earlier. But unlike the foreman, Alexander maintained his arrogant composure. Mark Jenkins is a disgruntled employee trying to save his own skin, Alexander declared. Whatever he told you is fabricated. Detective Larson placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Alexander's voice filled the room. Listen carefully. Mark, when the crane fails, it has to look like an accident caused by cheap equipment my father approved. Alexander's face went white. But he didn't break. That's doctored audio. Anyone can fake recordings these days. The detective pulled out printed text messages. What about these messages from your personal phone to Mark's detailing exactly which safety equipment to purchase and how to forge the paperwork Mark had access to company phones? He could have sent those himself, for every piece of evidence. Alexander had an excuse, a deflection, a denial. His legal training served him well, but the mountain of proof was overwhelming. I want to speak with my son, I said finally, unable to watch this charade any longer. Detective Larson hesitated. Mr. Harrison, I'm not sure that's advisable. Please, just 5 minutes. Alone in the interrogation room. I looked across the table at the man who had once been my pride and joy, the son I taught to throw a baseball, helped with homework, walked down the aisle at his wedding. Why, Alexander? My voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me? To our family, for the first time that evening? Alexander's mask slipped, his jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of the anger that had been driving him all along. You really want to know? His voice was cold, bitter, because you always planned to give everything to Benjamin. The company, your respect, your love. Everything was always going to him. The words hit me like physical blows. That's not true. Son, isn't it? Alexander leaned forward, years of resentment pouring out. Benjamin, the golden boy. Benjamin, the good son. Benjamin who can do no wrong. You were planning to change your will. Weren't you? Give him controlling interest in the company? I've worked for my entire adult life. I stared at my eldest son, seeing clearly for the first time the jealousy and bitterness that had been eating away at him for years. So, you decided to destroy me instead, I said quietly. I decided to take what was rightfully mine. Alexander slammed his fist on the table. I built that company just as much as you did. I deserve to inherit it, not what you handed over to my younger brother. The confessions spilled out in a torrent of rage and self-justification. The bribes to Mark, the forged documents, the staged accident. All of it designed to make me look incompetent. So the board would remove me and install Alexander as CEO. "I never intended for anyone to get seriously hurt," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The accident was supposed to be minor, just enough to trigger an investigation." When Detective Larson returned, Alexander had confessed to everything. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. I saw my son, but I also saw a stranger consumed by greed and jealousy. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I knew I had to say something. Alexander sat there in handcuffs, his face a mixture of defiance and desperation. "Son," I said quietly, my voice heavy with years of regret. "I never favored Benjamin over you. I love both my boys equally. But love doesn't mean handing over a company to someone who isn't ready for the responsibility." Alexander looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to sit on my lap while I reviewed construction blueprints. "You were always so focused on shortcuts, on quick wins." I continued. "Benjamin earned his promotions through hard work and integrity. I was hoping you'd learn those same values, but instead, I gestured helplessly at the handcuffs. It's too late now." "Dad," Alexander whispered, "it's never too late for redemption, son. But you have to want it." As they led him away, I made a silent promise that someday, somehow, I would find a way to help my eldest son find his way back to the man I'd always hoped he could become. 1 month later, I sat in my office, watching the late afternoon sun cast golden rays across the oak desk that had witnessed so much turmoil. The same desk where Detective Larson had found forged documents, where Margaret had spread out financial records that saved my life, where I'd signed papers that would reshape my family's future forever. The chaos had finally settled into something resembling peace. The 4 injured workers from the crane collapse had made full recoveries, thanks to the best medical care our insurance and personal funds could provide. James Carter would walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life, but he'd return to work with a generous settlement and our guarantee that Harrison Builders would always prioritize safety above profits. The Chicago Sun-Times had run a front-page story titled, "Local CEO Cleared of All Charges. Son's Betrayal Shocks Construction Industry." My reputation, battered but not broken, was slowly being restored. Clients who had distanced themselves during the investigation were returning with new projects and renewed trust. Susan knocked softly on my door. "Mr. Harrison, Benjamin and Margaret are here for the meeting." I looked up to see my younger son and daughter-in-law standing in the doorway. Benjamin had grown into his new role as executive vice president with remarkable grace, handling the media attention and client concerns with maturity beyond his 32 years. Margaret, now our chief financial officer, had earned the respect of every employee in the building. "Come in, both of you," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. Benjamin took his seat, but Margaret hesitated. The past month had been hardest on her. She'd lost her marriage, her home, and the life she'd built with Alexander. All to save a family that wasn't even hers by blood. "Margaret, please sit down," I said gently. "We have important business to discuss." David Brooks, our family attorney for 28 years, spread the legal documents across my desk. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he explained each clause and provision. "The restructuring is straightforward," David said in his measured voice. "Benjamin will receive 38% ownership of Harrison Builders. Margaret will receive 27%, and Richard will retain 35% as chairman of the board." I picked up my fountain pen, the same one I'd used to sign my first construction contract 40 years ago. "This feels right," I said, looking at both of them. "You've both earned this." Benjamin leaned forward. "Dad, are you sure about this? It's a huge decision. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I signed the first document with steady hands. Margaret risked everything to save me. And you, Benjamin, you've shown leadership and integrity that this company needs. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Richard, I don't deserve this. I was married to the man who tried to destroy you. You were married to my son. I corrected her. But when it mattered most, you chose what was right over what was easy. That takes courage I'm not sure I would have had in your position. As I signed the final document making the ownership transfer official, I thought about Alexander. He was serving his 7-year sentence at Stateville Correctional Center, and according to his lawyer, he'd refused all visitors, including me. The judge had been harsh, but fair. Corporate fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud and endangering the lives of workers. She'd said during sentencing, "These crimes strike at the heart of public trust in American business." I'd sat in the courtroom gallery, watching my eldest son in his orange jumpsuit, wondering where I'd gone wrong as a father. Margaret had been beside me, holding my hand as tears streamed down both our faces. "There's something else," I said, closing the legal folder. "I've been thinking about Alexander." Benjamin and Margaret exchanged glances. We'd all been thinking about him, but none of us had known how to bring it up. "I know he made terrible choices," I continued, "but he's still my son. And someday, when he's served his time and hopefully learned from his mistakes, I want him to know that forgiveness is possible." Margaret reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "That's very generous." "Richard, it's not generous," I said. "It's what families do. We forgive each other even when forgiveness seems impossible." The sun was setting now, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and pink. In a month, everything had changed. My company was stronger. My family was healing. And I'd learned that sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. As Benjamin and Margaret left my office, chatting quietly about tomorrow's board meeting, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the growing darkness. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Sometimes the people we trust most can surprise us in ways we never expected. This true story holds lessons every family should hear. Don't be like me. Don't fail to understand true fairness between your children. I thought giving opportunities based on merit was fair, but I never understood Alexander's perspective or addressed his feelings of being overlooked. As parents, we must see fairness through each child's heart, not just our own eyes. What we call merit-based decisions can feel like favoritism to a child desperately seeking our approval. This grandpa's story moment taught me that blood doesn't always determine loyalty. Margaret, who married into our family, showed more integrity than my own flesh and blood. She risked everything to save me from a conspiracy I never saw coming. Her sacrifice reminds us that love is proven through actions, not words. The most painful lesson from this true story is that unaddressed resentment poisons family relationships. Alexander's jealousy grew for years, hidden beneath professional success. As fathers, we must create safe spaces for children to express feelings without fear of judgment. God has a way of placing guardian angels when we need them most. Margaret was mine. When she knocked on my door that February morning, she answered a calling to do what was right, even when it cost her everything. Her courage saved 4 workers and prevented injustice that would have destroyed an innocent man. These grandpa stories carry wisdom across generations. Sometimes warnings come from unexpected sources. A daughter-in-law who barely knew me proved more trustworthy than the son I'd raised for 37 years. Faith played a crucial role in my survival. When everything seemed lost, when evidence was stacked against me, when my son's betrayal threatened to crush my spirit, I believed truth would prevail. And it did, through Margaret's courage and Detective Larson's investigation. This true story reminds us that forgiveness isn't just about the person who wronged us. It's about freeing ourselves from hatred and resentment. I'm still working on forgiving Alexander, but harboring anger only poisons our hearts. The Lord works in mysterious ways, using our darkest moments to reveal who truly stands with us. Margaret's warning wasn't just about that day. It was about choosing integrity over comfort, truth over convenience. If this story touched your heart and made you think about trust and fairness in your family, please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching from. These grandpa stories need sharing because they carry lessons that could save someone else's family from destruction. Share this story to remind others that warnings come from unexpected places and that treating our children with genuine fairness, not just what we think is fair, might be the most important parenting decision we ever make.